Rotarian Rashmi. Could you kindly introduce
Yes.
Rotarian Joe?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. It is quite my privilege to introduce Joe Muganda again, though I don't think he needs much introduction since most of the Rotarians know him. So I will quickly go through his, corporate career and also start off with his education. Joe studied in the University of Buckingham and he did his MBA from the University of Leicester. He's had a rather long, illustrious career, which is very diverse, and he's worked in several different companies like the BAT, where he was the business unit head. He was the head of regulatory and corporate affairs also over there. He's been the MD of EABL. He's been the group CEO of Nation Media Group. And his last stint was the MD of Vivo Energy, which is basically Shell in Africa. I'm sure he has a lot of interesting anecdotes and experiences to share today. And I would like to hand this over to President Ritesh and Rotarian Margarita to ask him all the questions to which I know Joe will have very fascinating answers.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rotarian Rashmi and Rotarian Joe. Dr. Margareta and I will both be asking you a couple of questions, and I'm sure we'll get to learn quite a bit from this conversation.
Thank you very much. As I said, I'm not too sure what the questions are, and when we have individuals of the caliber of Manu, Arun in the audience, I'm always very nervous because when I started out my career, those were the people we looked up to. And for them to be now listening to me is quite an interesting situation. But let's see how it goes.
That's wonderful. Dr. Margareta, are you with us?
Yeah.
Perfect. So, Rotarian Joe, I want to ask you a very simple question, actually. If you can kindly define what you feel about your first year as a Rotarian at Rotary Club of Nairobi.
It's been very different from what I thought it would be, partially because I think the whole concept of meeting virtually is something that had never quite occurred to me that is the way it would be. I also feel that it has limited my ability to interact and might be off my own abilities to the Rotary. So it's a bit of mixed feelings. I think I could do much more. That's where I am. But having said that, I've also met a lot of people, and every single time, every week, that's the one thing that surprised me. I never quite realized that you meet every week. But every time I log on, you get very interesting discussions with very varied subjects. I think one of the ones I enjoyed most, I can't remember her name, but the lady who was a musician singing. That's not necessarily what when you're going into Rotary, you expect. So it's been an interesting experience thus far.
That's excellent feedback. That actually tells me something that I'd better work on getting another singer sometime very soon, actually. In part, you actually asked one of the questions I wanted to ask next. I wanted to ask you, what is it that you like most about the club? Maybe you can elaborate what you like most about this particular club.
I think that's fairly straightforward. The fact that you have such a wide array of discussions on a weekly basis that make one think very, very hard about what you're doing, what's available, how the world will be. I mean, I'm still thinking about the discussion we had last week. And it's got me back into one of the passions that I have about change. One of my experiences when I was running Nation. And I've spent a lot of time this week thinking about that. So I think for anybody who's open-minded, it's the place to be.
Oh, that's great news. So, as a follow-up question, do you think you can change the course of someone's life by making an intervention? Examples of any such interventions that you may have made in the past in your various capacities?
I think without a doubt, yes. I think one of the things that I've probably been doing quietly on the side is the whole concept of the corporate world is very male dominated. It's terribly male dominated, and I think we need to be doing quite a lot more to make sure that we have ladies coming right through the organization. I don't know whether I was successful, but the interventions that one deliberately sort of makes to ensure that this part of the corporate world does grow, does come to fruition is something that we would do. And for those of us who work particularly in multinationals, in order to grow through the organization, you had to have performed different roles in different countries, through, especially when you were younger. And it was very easy for young men to be posted around different parts of the world. And I think it was much, much harder for ladies to take up roles and responsibilities, partially because when you're young, you are having children and this institution called marriage. And if you happen to be African, I think it's changing. But I see Justice Aloch smiling, but I think it is not an easy thing to leave your family and go and do a role in Zimbabwe or go do a role in a country where the education system is not the same. And I remember deliberately deciding that I'm going to try and change this thing. And in my first international posting, I was marketing director for BAT in Zimbabwe, and I deliberately went out of my way to send out young ladies to different postings with the idea that by the time we will be having a discussion about making them MDs, and that was my goal. Will they become managing directors in the organization? And there's a particular lady called Clara I pushed, and in an almost underhand fashion managed to get her out into Kenya. I almost lost my job actually in the process because I did not follow the traditional rules. I remember this particular lady, at some point I went and gave her a promotion letter in hospital, I think the day after she had given birth, because I thought that Clara had all the ability to one day become like me. Somebody took a bet on me. And the long and short of it, she actually did become the managing director of BAT Zimbabwe. Might be about 5-6 years after I had given up that job. She's now the chief operating officer of Liquid Telecom in Zimbabwe and in the region. So the answer to your question is yes. If you do take interventions, people do come through. There's another lady who's currently the managing director of Qual in Kenya, Lina Githuka. I took a particular interest in making sure her career went one way or the other. And in fact, at some point, she actually never thought she could become a managing director. So I think I sit very quietly proud that I did what I did. I don't think I turned the tide, but I contributed. I did my share to the best of my ability in the circumstances that were. So yes, if you make interventions, people succeed. I also think I personally succeeded because people took deliberate interventions to make sure that I had the opportunities to perform. And the important thing is when you get the opportunity, you don't let them down.
Well, those are some golden nuggets we've got from you, but you definitely have shaped the lives of these corporate leaders, the ones you've mentioned, and perhaps many more who you may or may not even recall at this point. This is absolutely wonderful. So could I ask you, what's your personal goal at the moment?
Currently, I'm spending a lot of time looking after myself. Let's start from there. I was not in great health, but I think I've come through that. I'm in decent shape right now. But I think I've spent a lot of time talking to younger businesses, particularly SMEs, and trying to get them to structure their businesses in manners that will allow them to succeed in the world. What I find quite astounding is, despite everything that's available in the world today, the basic operations, the structures under which they hope to succeed, are what sometimes hampers them. So I'm talking to a lot of younger people who've set up their own businesses, entrepreneurs. They're very entrepreneurial. That's not the problem. The problem is, as you start managing growth, if you don't have structure that is being underpinning that organization, it starts becoming a very difficult thing to do, and you keep getting surprised because you don't have structures that allow you to see what the future is. I think as I led businesses, I always say that you've got to look at the future in the present. And that then starts allowing you to plan into the future. So they get big orders, they can't finance it. They get big contracts with organizations that require certain standards. They're surprised. So as I mentor a lot of these businesses, I'm sort of moving away from mentoring individuals to mentoring small, I wouldn't call them even SMEs, smaller than that, to try and build structure and get them going. And it's quite interesting what is available to allow them to thrive. So that's the space I'm operating in right now.
Thank you for sharing that. And something you've just mentioned is the ability to actually foresee and probably to see potential challenges which are going to take place, and to already preempt what the solutions can be. Related to this, we had a very interesting brief conversation last week, and we were talking about all the infrastructure which is work which is taking place. And just in that conversation, surprise to us, we got to know you're actually part of the committee. And could you share with us, you see, that is also one of the vision projects. What challenges do you see it facing? We see that the work is going on absolutely well and on time. And could you share something about that with us?
You mean the
highways,
the expressway?
Yeah.
To be fair, it's not actually in the organization that I am in. I just happen to know a little bit about it because I sit on the Kenya Urban Roads Board. But that's actually being run by KENHA, which is the Kenya National Highways Authorities. But at the end of the day, I mean, the principles are the same. I think there's a lot that has been planned around the country. The country is becoming very, very urban. And as you become urban, you've got to plan the infrastructure that goes around it. The other thing is, many of us think, for instance, let's argue, where does Nairobi start and where does Nairobi end? Technically, there are boundaries within Nairobi. And it's very interesting when the COVID boundaries were being drawn. Even the first time round, they were much broader than what many of us understand as Nairobi. Now, when we are thinking in Kura about where to build the infrastructure, and you've got to think might be 10, 15 years out, because if the town catches up with the road, if you try to build a road, you've got to move people out. And all the things the unpleasant things that come, it starts costing you more money. The design of the road becomes a little bit of a problem. So as we've got to be thinking, might be 10, 15 years out, getting the resources to try and build the infrastructure, because the reality is, as far as the urban Nairobi part, Kajiado is part of this town. Kiambu has become part of this town. If we don't put the road now, we will find buildings. We will find people have put up businesses. Getting them out is going to be a big challenge. And as I've been on the board for a short time, and I think it's the connecting what is going to appear in the future, as I say, seeing the future in the present. That's really the challenge. And more importantly, finding different ways of funding those activities. Government is not in a terribly good shape as far as availability of funds to build all these things. We've got to think of the PPPs, private partnerships, the politics that comes with it, the loans that come with it, and the criticism that comes with it. All that is in our purview. But as the board of Kura, we now have to start thinking about that future, how to fund it, and make sure that we're doing it. But there are things that are very interesting. I've been there for a short time. What I find fascinating is today in every road design that you'll find, the pavements, the bicycles, all that is being thought about, and you're beginning to see all those things actually being put up when roads are being put up. And the other thing that I found very interesting is a lot of people see urban areas as Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu. Our mandate goes to much smaller town, most of the county headquarters. You will now find that they're being tarmacked. All that is part of what we are doing, and it is definitely an interesting aspect. Very different for me coming from the corporate or private sector world, but it's also a new learning, improving my networks within government and understanding how government works.
Well, that's absolutely wonderful, and congratulations to the entire team and committee, because the work is going on so well. As we drive along the highways, we can see the speed and efficiency with which all these pylons are being put up and all the work which is taking place. And there's literally little or no interference to the daily traffic, except for certain spots, which I know.
I think the only comment I'll make is it's very interesting that when the general population can see the actual progress, they are tolerant of disruption. And that is what you're beginning to see. But if you dig a hole and leave it there for another 6 months, people start complaining, and people don't like that. But I think the project you're talking about, if you don't go there for 2 weeks, you come back, you see progress, and that makes the stakeholder engagement much easier.
Absolutely, absolutely. And related to this, since you have mentioned that you have to look, let's say, 15 years into the future, and I want to bring this back to Rotary. Very interesting. This Rotary year, Rotary International actually introduced environment as one of the key areas of focus. And with all the infrastructure work which is taking place, which is very crucial and important for our economy to move forward, is there any environmental aspect which is also being taken into consideration hand in hand?
I think the answer is yes. Is it enough? I don't think so. And I think the bit that needs to, I think as stakeholders of our city and our country, the more, I think one of the things that was passed in the current constitution that a lot of implementers of policy find to be a pain, but I think is a necessary pain, is stakeholder engagement. And I think for very many years, a government could simply do what it wanted to do without engaging stakeholders. That step, if you miss it now, you go to the courts, they'll stop you dead. And I think it's imperative that everybody actually does pay attention to these things, and at the point at which people are called for their opinions, that is taken into consideration. And I think the environment, they are very good at it anyway. I mean, I don't think we need to encourage them, but at that point in time is where the stakeholders must ask for their pound of flesh. And you'd be amazed how conscious those in government are now aware that they used to find it as a hindrance, but we've learned that if you don't take it into consideration, you don't get progress. So even the guys, the engineers, they're being taught about to manage stakeholders and do all those things. So the more we get involved, you need to get another generation of engineers who know that this is a normal part of life. The better our country will be. I think at the beginning of the discussion last week, we were talking about all the trees that had been chopped as we were building this new road. I remember personally coming round Riverside Drive. I'd been out of town for a while, and looking at all the trees in the middle of the road that I had seen literally since I went to Westlands Primary School, so, and the Westlands area, and I was horrified because I loved those trees. And as we build our country, I think we need to be conscious of that fact. Can we do more? I think the answer is yes. But I think people should not sit back and complain after the fact. I think there's opportunity to intervene right up front.
That's absolutely true, and stakeholder engagement and involvement is very, very key. There is a question which has come in from Past President Mike. Would you kindly unmute?
Joe, good to see you.
Nice to see you, Mike. We seem to have lost his.
From for you is about these interviews with the candidates, judges, about the candidates' performances. Not ask you about how you thought the commissioners conducted themselves with their questions, but I'm going to, in a way, yes, in a way, no, take you back to your previous life in the media and ask you, how did you feel the media has been handling the whole thing? And, you know, there have been some wonderful profiles by the candidates, by the legal gentleman in Nation, who was praised by the public editor, rightly, I think. But mostly, it's been the usual highlighting of the negative, where there were naughty boys and girls, where they'd been hammered, where they had unpleasant interchanges with one of the commissioners. The only way to get media circulation up. What are your contemporary, dispassionate thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, Mike, I didn't get the front bit of your question. Are you asking about the, are you talking in relation to the CJ interviews? I didn't get the first bit of your question.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Absolutely the CJ interviews.
And if I understood you correctly, you're asking whether media has done its job properly relative to what we can get out. Look, in fact, it's very interesting you asked that question.
Given my perception that, as usual on everything, they've selected the negative, the confrontational, etc.
In fact, I share your view. I was having a chat with a friend of mine who happens to be a senior lawyer, and I was asking him whether we seem to be concentrating on the things that have gone sort of wrong, that might not necessarily be what matters in whether somebody is a CJ or not. I think the media is not using its power properly. That's my personal view. I think the media should be interrogating a lot more about the judicial philosophies of the individuals who've offered themselves up for that. They have the platforms, rather than spending their lives talking about what I would call incidences, to be very honest, and judging an individual's whole career on that particular thing, and on the basis of that, then peddling a narrative that suggests he's not competent to be our Chief Justice. That's, I think, where we are, and I think media should be challenged and taken on. I personally have called a couple of the editors asking why you couldn't do much more to let us know a lot more about these individuals, what they actually think, how they think, and would be a decent Chief Justice. I think media is entitled to have an opinion. It doesn't necessarily should. The people who are going to make the decision are the people who are going to make the decision. But you can influence the whole narrative in a much more positive manner rather than necessarily
in a
focusing.
balanced way. In a balanced way.
In a,
And also to do a critique of the
yes.
performance of the commissioners.
Yes. No, I think you're right. I share your concern, and I'm quite frankly a bit disappointed by the way the media has gone about it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Rotarian Joe, now to bring us back to a comparative between the corporate and the social aspect. You've been working in teams all along throughout your life. So working in teams, corporate, and now in a social setting, what are the learnings?
I don't think there's I don't know. My personal perception is, I think what you end up doing, whether you're working in a team, in the corporate world, or in a social setting, what you're trying to do in both instances is there is a vision of what the organization is trying to achieve. And what you try to do is leverage and get the best out of people. It doesn't quite matter which side of the fence one is. I think the skills are a little bit more different on the social setting in that it's not a subordinate leader relationship. So you've got to sell that vision much more. In the corporate side, if you're the boss, you set the vision, you can drive it and get people behind it. If you're a kind boss, and I don't mean by being kind you don't have a strong view. You let people tell you what their genuine view is. I lead with the philosophy that it's a privilege to have your opinion. It's not a right. And when you get people's genuine opinions, it helps produce a better product, whichever side of the fence you are in. I'm one of those guys who has no question. I don't have any, what is it called? I survive happily in conflict. And I expect people to tell me what they genuinely think, even if it's contrary to what I think. We'll deal with the niceties later, because I think if you don't put your best opinion on the table at the time at which it matters, the "I told you so" thing doesn't quite help anybody. So I think the teams, for me, it doesn't really matter which side of the skill set is similar. You apply it differently. You must be socially aware of your own abilities and your ability to influence people or lack thereof.
You know, interestingly, you just mentioned that you thrive in conflict, and what I'm understanding and what I'm aware of is that you're very adept at conflict resolution.
Not necessarily. Sometimes I have to be the guy who's who the resolution is being applied on. But as the boss, you've got to allow your teams to do that for you. I mean, I worked with Rashmi. Rashmi knows me fairly well, but as I said, for me, conflict means putting an opposing point of view. It doesn't mean fighting, fighting negatively.
Well, I'm sure Justice Oluoch must be smiling. We will ask for her thoughts as well.
Yeah.
Rashmi, Rashmi, are you with us? Rashmi? I see.
I was on mute. Yeah, I'm there. Yeah.
Yes, Rashmi, I see that Dr. Margareta has some difficulties with her connection. So would you like to kindly ask some more questions to Rotarian Joe?
Yes, just a minute. I'm unmuting my thing. There's some problem. Give me a few minutes. Just...
Sure. So whilst we wait, Dr. Manu Chandaria has a question. And Ambassador Dr. Josephine.
Yes, we've witnessed an increase, a recent increase in gender and domestic-based violence. That is really, really alarming. The media has done well to capture the incidents that perhaps the reporters managed to document. Definitely there will be more that are escaping attention of the media and of Kenyans at large. But we want to thank the media, but to ask what role can they play in empowering victims or potential victims of violence, in spreading more community messaging on accommodation at household level, in the community, respect for gender. What more can the media do?
It's an interesting question in the sense that the media has highlighted, and the problem is it doesn't seem to be abetting. But I think the media has a platform that allows them it allows the reach to all and sundry across the country. And I think at some point it has to be a little bit more than reporting, in that they've got to make a very conscious decision to put some of their resources towards solving this issue and allowing the people who are tasked to, within government or with NGOs who are driving the whole agenda, to use their platforms to help drive a conversation that will help us resolve this issue. And I think the conversation that is not steered or not moderated is part of our problem, Daktari, because when you see what goes on in social media, it's one group bashing the other one and the other one, and it almost becomes like we are right, you're wrong. And I think media can use their platforms. They have the ability, they have the skill set, and go beyond simply reporting. Reporting is good because it highlights the issue, but how do they help solve it? I think they have the platforms. Getting media awareness is probably one of the most expensive things in this country. I mean, for those of us who've tried to access it. So I think they can offer their platforms. And I think the other thing is they should do it jointly, not as different organizations. If we can get together to organize a presidential debate, put so much resources to ensuring you get the whole country to watch this debate, why can't we do it for such topics? I think, I mean, I was involved in the last presidential debate, and I was fascinated how we drove an agenda against different political interests and eventually got something out. It didn't quite work out the way we thought it would, but we galvanized the whole country to watching one event at a particular point in time. Are we saying that they can't do that? And people kept arguing it couldn't be funded. We found ways. We got the NGOs to help fund it. So I think something similar could be done, and they could do it jointly. I think it's a much more powerful message. If you could, I mean, if you took the front pages of the papers for once a month, and we put across similar, that topic and similar things, it does not have to be politics.
And perhaps you could just put in place little tips for families, for victims, where to go, where to look for help, you know, so that people don't feel alone. Because some of it is just basic lack of information, of course, to the person who is a victim, but also the need for messaging that empowers families, and that is almost preventative in terms of creating environments of love, environments where people feel safe, environments to redress some of the stress we are facing. Some of that is just messaging.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah.
I mean, in all the jobs that I ever did, I think it was the one job as MD Nation Media that I you know, you don't quite realize it when you're in the corporate world, but it is the one job where you have access to pretty much everybody in this country on your telephone, and every time we ganged up as media houses, people paid attention. So it is something that can be done.
But Joe, I would like to ask you, do you think that media houses are as relevant as they were like even a couple of decades or even a couple of years back? Increasingly, media houses have lost their teeth, and they're they're basically struggling for survival. And when you're struggling for survival, it places you in a quite a compromised position to take on certain stands and uphold what you think is right.
I think, Rashmi, where might be I'd have a slight nuance to the question that you asked. I think relevant, the answer is yes. Are media houses struggling financially? The answer is yes. Now, I think there's a difference between having the platform to get messages across profitably and still having that platform. So I think the media houses need to distinguish between how to keep their models relevant to make sure that they can fund the narrative, and having the platform to fund the narrative. And if you look at the West, media houses, look at the American election. Fox News, CNN, New York Times were all still very relevant in influencing the narrative as to what was going on. And that's a slightly different discussion from, are the business models going to be relevant to keep them going for a long time? And I think the world is definitely changing, as we were discovering even last week with things like medicine. But I think so long as they are able to have the platform going, then they still can influence discourse in a country. And I like to distinguish ability for discourse and the P&L. They're two separate things in my mind.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon Dr. Manu Chandaria and thereafter Past President Arun.
Maybe I can start while we wait for Dr. Chandaria.
Yes.
Joe, I'm going to change the subject a little bit. In the last 12 months, one thing or another took me to some of the counties, both at the coast, Kajiado side, Nakuru side, as well as Nanyuki side. Whilst we talk of unemployment in the country, it was extremely pleasing to see the number of the development, and the development is followed with all sorts of jobs, whether it's the roadside, Juakali people, the restaurants, the bars, the hotels that's mushrooming up, and then you see a lot of farms coming up, run by small families and so on. In your opinion, yes, employment is a very serious issue in any country, not only here, even in the United States. After what happened over there, they're worried about employment. How do you see it yourself? Do you see we are moving in the right direction, or are we moving? Our employment creation is more of a individuals just survival issue, or are we creating entrepreneurs? Yes, the number of industries, new industries coming up. Contrary to what people believe, we think the number of industries are increasing. I mean, if you look at the addition of Chinese industries, that's gone up a lot. Most of my friends in industries, if they're making, all doing expansion and coming up with new products and so on. How are you looking at that one? Are we still in a really terrible crisis, or are we moving in the right direction? Nothing happens overnight, but are we moving in the right direction?
I think my answer is I think it's a little bit of both. I've spent a lot of the last 12 months outside Nairobi. I come from Siaya, so I've spent a lot of time outside Nairobi. And as you speak to the smaller SMEs, a lot of them are not necessarily in Nairobi. I think the devolution thing has definitely done something to create a sense that you don't have to come into the big cities to succeed. And there's no doubt, I meet a lot of young people, simply because there's nothing to do, they will try. So you meet guys keeping rabbits, people trying to farm vegetables, and all things that we sometimes don't necessarily count as employment. But I think the trouble, Arun, is the number of impediments that are put in their place to try, and when they try to formalize their little businesses is crazy. I run a small lodge in my hometown, and I need 9 licenses. And what I find annoying is not so much even the fact that I need 9 licenses. For me to get the licenses, I literally have to beg and plead to pay. That is mind-boggling. I mean, I've got the money. I want a license, liquor license. It's a whole process that anybody who doesn't have the resources, because if I've got to leave where I am to go into the small town 6 times to do something I could do once, it's a cost which they don't have. They are busy struggling, and I think that, and as the counties are beginning to try and raise revenue, it's amazing what they come up with to as far as licenses are concerned. So that is a big pain for young people to try and thrive. But the opportunities being created because the center of spend has been sort of spread across the country. My answer is yes. I think it's the right direction. I share your point of view. I saw there is somebody now in my particular area producing nails and mabati, and I never ever thought that it would make economic sense. But what I find fascinating is the guy is getting on with it and pressing ahead. So, I mean, to answer you, I think it is in the right direction, but we need to streamline a lot of the bureaucracy to make sure that when they actually start, they can be successful.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Joe. You're so right. I mean, you don't only have to be a small business to struggle, but even in the organized large businesses, matured businesses, the number of new regulations and the taxes and other things that's coming out is phenomenal. I give you an example. I'm on one of the committee on East African ESC ministry on how to expand business within East Africa. And we were talking of aflatoxin and the restriction in maize coming into Kenya. And it's all because of one of the division they created called AFA at Ministry of Agriculture. And the power has just gone into the heads of those people. They don't want to cooperate with Kenya Bureau of Standards. They don't want to cooperate with East African Community, Aden Mohammed and others. And they are causing all sorts of things. And it's indirectly for their own personal selfish reason. I won't expand it, but you understand the language. So yes, even for formal businesses, we are not looking at how to do the ease of doing business. We're just coming up with more and more regulations.
In fact, I sum it up this way. Most regulators in Kenya think that their job is to put a hurdle in the way. They say they are helping, and I get it. I mean, KEBS has to keep standard. I get that. But there's nothing wrong with keeping the standard. But when I submit my product to get the standard, can it take 3 weeks and not 6 months? If I'm going to build a tank that has to be put underground for a petrol station and it needs to be inspected, for heaven's sake, please come and inspect it. And my experience, even as you say, in the large corporate sector, just getting through the hoops of the regulatory authorities to allow you to operate a petrol station is quite mind-boggling. And I remember the last petrol station I set before I left Vivo. It took us 2 weeks to get the weights and measures people to come and put the seal to allow the petrol station to pump. This was a 60 million shilling investment in a very small town. So it can, now if the big companies are struggling, you wonder what the small guys are doing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we had a question from Dr. Manu Chandari. I think he's not with us at the moment. Justice Joyce Alwatch.
Thank you, President Ritesh. I think my question has actually been answered. It had something to do with how the media can offer their platforms to get messages across. And I think Dr. Josephine touched on it quite a bit, and the speaker, Joe Muganda, did answer it. You know, talking about things like places of safety. We have places in this country where a woman who is really been beaten up can't stay for a day or two. There's so much that they can highlight and make people know that these places exist and you can make use of them on a temporary basis. Things like child helplines. So I think my question has been answered, but I would just like to repeat that, you know, they could do more, but maybe we also need to give them the information that this and this and this exist in this country. There are many, many places that exist, but I think people don't know enough about these facilities. So those of us who know about the facilities, we also need to speak out about them. That's all. Yeah.
It's an interesting thing you say. I think if just to tell people the cycle of how a media house works, they've got, I always tell people, you've got 90 pages to fill. You've got 24 hours TV to fill. Never host your press conference at 6 p.m. Nobody will, no journalist will cover it because they've got to get these things out. So understanding how the media cycle works is one thing, but I'll be happy to get, and I think, Rashmi, we could get Clifford to come and just have a chat to everybody about the kinds of platforms they have. I remember when we started the Nation Leadership Forum, the whole objective was to influence the narrative. And in my mind, I didn't say it publicly, but try and influence the narrative away from the usual politics about which formation is doing this, and how can we use our platforms to influence things that really matter to people. But as you say, people don't necessarily know how to get to the media, and media can also be daunting because not everybody is on the same page. They're different stakeholders, but I think that might be a topic for one of our people to just come and let people know how a media house works and how it can be used to influence the narrative of things that matter to society. Because this gender violence thing is a pain, and it's becoming worse by the day.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
And we have another question, one final question from Professor Michael Hopkins. But Justice Oluwatch, you know, you've just mentioned something very important, as has Rotarian Joe, and I'm thinking that also on the Rotary front, I think there is more we can do for this to raise awareness. So perhaps we can also have that discussion of how Rotary can involve themselves in the awareness of such important information.
Yeah.
And yes, Professor Michael Hopkins.
Thank you very much, President Ritesh, for allowing me to interject. I'm pretty interested about Kenya media, which, as you see and have said, seems to be single-tracked in a lot of its discussion. And one area where I think it could perhaps do a little bit more, and I'd like to ask Joe what he thinks about this, which is I wonder whether the road lobby in this country is much more powerful than the rail lobby. And I wonder, is that because roads don't make a profit or loss, while rail normally makes a loss? Yet Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, Bangkok, New York, London, and so on, have all invested heavily in urban rail to ease road congestion and also, of course, pollution. And I think this major road, it seems that you've been involved in some way along Waiaki Way, if I've said that correctly, as far as I can see, strikes me as a total waste of resources when a rail would have served perfectly the people who are going to use it and also create much less pollution and not so much damage on the environment. So it does seem that Kenya seems very, very far behind in general in discussing such issues, which I also call in my forthcoming book on the big issues of the day. So, Joe, is the road lobby much more powerful than the rail lobby, or does it not exist? Thank you very much.
I'm not too sure how to answer your question, but I mean, the absolute reality is, if you look at, and you don't need to look far because I've checked this, there is no big city around the world that doesn't have that has an efficient ability to move people that does not rely on rail. I mean, it's simple. You experience it when you travel to these places, but for whatever reason, and I think it's not about. It could be a lobby, but it just seems that in the minds of a lot of we who are involved in the stakeholder in managing the infrastructure, we've never quite thought of rail. I was in a discussion recently where that has been talked about, but I think the biggest issue in the minds of people is that it's difficult to do. So should we give up? The answer is no. I think if we are going to move people efficiently in large numbers, we've got to have a decent public rail system. And it's as simple as that. I don't think in my mind there is a debate, Dr. Hopkins, about it. I think it's a fact. Everywhere where you have successful public transport, there is rail. Rail moves a lot of people at the same time, and roads will just put more cars.
You're absolutely right. Now, can I nominate you to lead such a lobby? Is that allowed?
I'm beginning to learn that every time I talk at Rotary, I get a job.
well, I'm the reverse. Every time I talk at Rotary, I lose one. Anyway, thank you very much.
That's a balancing factor happening there. I'd like to call upon the Vice President Ambassador Dr. Josephine Ojiambo to kindly give a vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, President Ritesh, for honoring me with this duty to pass the vote of thanks. So Rotarians, Rotaractors, if we have them here, and our guests, there is something I want us to remind us about, and that's thankfulness. Thankfulness is the beginning of gratitude, and gratitude is the beginning of thankfulness. So the two of them come together, and yes, we are now going to together pass a vote of thanks to our keynote speaker this afternoon, Joe Muganda. But I just want to say it's been a wonderful lunchtime we've spent together. We've been able to fellowship and we've been able to learn. And therefore, Dr. Joe Muganda, we want to thank you for enriching this hour of fellowship. Your thoughts, always provocative, have taken us around the world, focusing on the Africa region and Southern Africa. You've spoken with us about corporate governance and regulation. You've also spoken about infrastructural development, and Dr. Hopkins has summarized the issues around road and rail, but also around the lobbies, road lobby, rail lobby, but also the flora and fauna lobby has been part of our thoughts this afternoon. particularly when we focus on environment. And thank you for speaking on gender relations and national leadership, and also on the operations of a media house. I think all of these have really increased our knowledge this afternoon. I want to also, with you, thank Rashmi and Margarita, who come from your sector, for making it possible for us to engage with you this afternoon, and all the Rotarians who have intervened, from Senior Manu Chandaria through to Arun, to Lady Justice Alwatch, and Peridich, who spoke a little earlier and has left us. It's been a wonderful lunchtime gathering. Thank you so much. And we look forward to listening not only to you, but to others in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ambassador Dr. Josephine. And thank you, Rotarian Joe, for this wonderful session we had today. What I actually also want to inform all the club members is that Rotary Club of Nairobi, this is the 90th year. And in order to mark this year, we have a legacy project going on, as we want to come up with an e-book, which is going to showcase our club members. And today's talk, we did get some one-on-one conversation with you with regards to your personal life as well as your corporate journey, and also a Rotary. So that's more or less what we want to do. We want to engage all our club members in one-on-one conversations. It may not happen during the Thursday meetings, but we urge club members to kindly reach out to us and let us know when is the best time suited to them. Rashmi, Dr. Margareta, and myself can schedule a meeting, and we can have a Zoom conversation. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you very much. It was an enjoyable discussion.